Ralsei, 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 Ralsei. Everyone's favorite goat boy. Or fluffy boy, or cute boy, kind boy, peach boy, toothpaste boy. He's certainly one of Deltarune's most beloved characters, spawning a fairly ridiculous amount of merchandise, debates on if he looked better with or without the hat on, and a lot of speculation on secret evil intentions. In the world of wild and unfounded Deltarune fan theories, I figure it wouldn't hurt to throw one more hat in the ring. Consider the following. What if this egg boy was in fact a little bit less boy and a little bit more egg all along? Now, I know what some of you are thinking immediately. This again, I've played these games before. Didn't people used to argue that Ralsei was secretly a girl, hiding her gender because she wanted to manipulate us into thinking she was part of the prophecy or something? Now, let's be clear here, this theory is not that theory. Before we go any further though, let me provide some context. First off, yes, hi, I myself am Transfem. It shouldn't come as any surprise then that trans characters and the way they're approached in media is a very personal topic to me. I've been a big fan of Transfem Ralsei since Chapter 1 first came out in 2018, and I've only seen the case for it strengthen and get more and more grounding in the time since then. I actually was originally planning on making this video before Chapters 3 and 4 came out, but I held off on it in hopes that the new chapters would deliver us some more spicy Ralsei moments to pick apart and analyze, and boy did they. Or should I say, girl did they? No. Oh, and one last thing. Yes, I know some of you in my audience are still waiting for the second video of my FNAF series. More updates on that will be at this timestamp if you're someone who's only here for that. Okay, now what is this video in particular? Is this a theory? Well, a majority of it will just be some good old-fashioned character analysis. I'll be talking about what Ralsei's character is about on a fundamental level, and pointing out things that I think are true, whether or not you buy into the overall theory. On top of that, I'll be using this analysis to argue why a Transfem reading of this little goat is actually really interesting, and in my opinion enhances the themes of the game overall. Alright, without any further ado, let's get on with the video. Yeah. Ralsei is a complicated character with a lot going on under the surface. As more of the game has been released, we've seen progressively more of Ralsei's true thoughts and feelings, beyond the mask he puts up for our benefit. One thing that chapters 3 and 4 have made clearer than ever is that Ralsei sort of has very little in terms of personal identity, and he seems to mostly base his life and sense of self around what he can do for others. Even before this new release though, there were already inklings of this idea in Ralsei's characterization. For one, he seems to have a real talent for blending into the background and going unnoticed, which I think is most clear in chapter 2. Noelle in particular seems to completely forget about Ralsei for the entire time they're on screen together, and Queen has more than a few instances of skipping over Ralsei when talking about the heroes. Hell, even Bergley makes a bigger impression on her. And it's not just these two, a lot of the Darkners pay way more attention to Chris and Susie, with Ralsei just kind of being there. It's hard to say exactly what this means or why it keeps happening. Aside from Chris and Susie being, Lightners, my other guess is that Ralsei's whole deal as the Prince of Darkness and seemingly only Darkner from the Pure Fountain might have something to do with why he's so good at blending into the background. But in-universe explanations aside, I don't think it's a stretch to guess that this tendency of Ralsei might also mean something with regard to his character. I mean, even if there is some magic thing about his nature that's making people ignore him by default, surely he could make more of a big deal of himself if he actually, tried to, right? But he doesn't. If anything, Ralsei seems pretty happy to stand back in the shadows and let everyone focus on Chris and Susie. After all, they're the Lightners, the real protagonists of this journey, and he's just here to support them. The first time we really get a look into Ralsei's view of himself is in the Acid Tunnel boat ride scene, where Chris and Ralsei have a proper one-on-one emotional conversation for the first time in the game. In it, Ralsei talks about how much he appreciates Susie and admires her for being so openly and boldly herself. He says the same for Chris, and we can return the compliment, saying it's nice when Ralsei is himself too. Immediately this takes him by surprise, and he says no one's ever said that to him before. It's clearly really meaningful for him to hear someone he cares about say that he should be who he wants to, who he is inside. But as he soon admits, he doesn't even really know what being Ralsei means. We get to see more of this side of Ralsei in Chapter 4's Castletown when we finally get a glimpse at his room. When we find the door at the end of the hallway, Susie runs past the tape to find nothing, an empty room. When she questions this, Ralsei responds by implying that he just didn't think he needed it. He never got around to it because in his mind, making everyone else happy was more important. I mean, that's his purpose, right? In his eyes, there's no reason for him to have anything because he isn't really a person, he exists for others. At least, that's what he's always thought. But lately, he's developing actual opinions. Likes, dislikes, desires, and fears. The idea of Ralsei actually getting to be real, to matter, to have preferences and desires and exist for himself is something he's barely even considered the possibility of at this point. And the time since knowing Chris and Susie, he's discovered more about himself and found happiness and friendship in ways he never even knew were possible. They've helped him understand how important it is that everyone be their truest self, the person they want to be on the inside. And now they're giving him the chance for the first time ever to define what being Ralsei is, in the way he wants to. I don't think it's a stretch to read this aspect of Ralsei's character through a trans lens. Ralsei finds himself in a very particular place in this scene, a place many trans people have also experienced. The feeling of being able to, for the first time, see a life you never thought you would get to live, as a version of yourself that actually feels like yourself, having actual happiness so much closer than you ever thought it could be, and wanting so badly to just reach out and grab it, but being afraid to. Afraid it goes against something fundamental to your nature, to the person you're supposed to be. I mean, Ralsei is someone who's always pushed her own desires under the rug, deciding it was best if they were left unthought about. But the time she's spent with her friends has made it clear to her that she just can't do that anymore. It's too painful, and there's no real purpose to it, not when they'll be there to support her, no matter what kind of person she turns out to be. It's worth mentioning that the song playing in this scene is Lost Girl. Most people assume this title refers to either Noelle or Des, but as Toby put it on Twitter, it's actually the kind of song that gets used repeatedly all over the game, even when Noelle's not around. I don't think the times it's used are random or meaningless though. It shows up in quite a few emotional moments, and most of these do involve characters being lost in some way, whether it be struggling with their emotions or recounting traumatic pasts. But the title of Lost Girl is a bit flexible with who it applies to, so is it so much of a stretch to say that in this scene, Ralsei herself is the Lost Girl? After all the other scenes featuring the song focus on girls, and maybe if it were a different Ralsei scene, it'd feel like more of a coincidence, but this one? The one where she talks about being uncertain about her identity and having new desires and fears that she's never dealt with before? When Toby made that original tweet revealing the song in 2019, he also posted this, saying, "Of course, that's not the only version of that song. The video includes another mix of Lost Girl, one with Susie's motif from Chapter 1. If the Lost Girl used in-game was originally meant to be Lost Girl Noelle, maybe this is Lost Girl Susie." And right alongside the two of them are some new sprites for Ralsei, with the caption, "Lots and lots of things happen. I just hope you can be friends with everyone someday." I don't know. Well, anyway, for many trans people, even if you've gotten as far as to recognize this thing is missing in your life, that would make you much happier if it was there. The hardest part can actually be getting yourself to make those choices on your own, especially when following the path of least resistance seems so easy in comparison. Ralsei is clearly unfamiliar with and slightly scared of the idea of making her own choices, but despite this discomfort, it's something she really craves deep down. Another scene that I think really emphasizes this is the sort of half cutscene from Board 2 of Tennis Game Show. Susie, wanting Chris to do the puzzle, swaps the controls so that they, and therefore we the player, end up controlling her character instead. When Ralsei calls her out on this, Susie agrees to switch them back, but instead swaps the controls again so that Ralsei is playing as Chris. Then this exchange happens. Thank you very... Wait a second. Susie, change me back! Come on, just for a bit. It'll be fun. Chris, don't you want your controller back? Well, if Chris says it's okay. So, Chris, which way should I... You got the controller. You choose. This way seems nice. Oh, a flower cut in half. This is a photo spot. How do I take a photo? Oops. Look, I got it. Taking photos is fun. It's fun just moving around. You know you can do that whenever, right? I guess so. I'm just used to following. I'm not normally supposed to be a player one. Honestly, I feel like this part kind of speaks for itself, but just to be clear, Ralsei here is experiencing for the first time what it feels like to be able to make her own choices, to be the leader and to not have to follow a path someone else has set out for her, and she clearly loves it. The game is kind of hitting us over the head here, telling us that this is something Ralsei desperately needs in other aspects of her life, and something that she, intentionally or not, has been kind of depriving herself of. There's also this line, which I remember really jumping out at me when I read it on my first playthrough. The weird gender fuckery implications are wonderful here. Ralsei worrying about it being confusing, and her little blush and excitement at the idea of someone just getting to play as the girl, even if it does confuse people. Isn't she just a peach? But as long as we're talking about Ralsei's fear of breaking out from what's expected of her, I think this is the perfect time to get into the next major side of the theory. Analyzing Ralsei's complicated relationship with identity is a good place to start, but it's hard to get too deep into it without addressing the thing that's causing all of Ralsei's turmoil in the first place, that being the prophecy. The prophecy, or the legend, is an aspect of Deltarune that's always just kind of hung in the air, floating on top of the story but not really being addressed too directly. I've always felt that Deltarune was probably not going to play this aspect of the narrative entirely straight, especially considering how famous Undertale is for subverting your expectations about basic narrative tools and plot structures much like this one. Chapter 4 gave us our first real look at the prophecy in depth, and for the first time, we really get to feel what kind of relationships individual characters have with it. I would argue that thematically, Deltarune's prophecy seems to represent the concept of fate. The way that characters approach the legend reflects how they react to fate in general, whether it be accepting it, hoping to change it, rejecting it outright, fighting against it, or ignoring it. Obviously, considering that we only have half the game, at least according to one mysterious wing Gaster, we can't really say how this prophecy narrative will resolve in the end, but we can certainly analyze characters' relationships to it based on what is there already. Ralsei's feelings on the prophecy are complicated, to say the least. He has the entire thing memorized by heart. Not just the version we see him recite in Chapter 1, but the much longer, more in-depth version that us players still seem to know only a fraction of. It's clearly something that means a lot to him, something he's based his entire existence around. And yet, despite all this, the prophecy is clearly something that terrifies him. He knows exactly what the future holds for him and his friends, even if we the audience don't, and he clearly has no idea how to rectify this knowledge of what seems to be a pretty horrible fate, with the type of belief and compliance to the prophecy he thinks he should have. As Ralsei explains to Suzy, he tried to work with the prophecy originally, carefully and subtly encouraging more kindness from the other heroes, with hopes that if they were kind, it would change. But this clearly wasn't enough. At this point, he's left with the choice of either falling in line completely and accepting whatever horrible fate will befall him and his friends, or rejecting the entire prophecy outright. One thing that we can see over and over in any visual aspects of the prophecy is that the prince is always shown wearing this robe, obscuring any identifying details of his face or body. Notably, this robe is the same outfit that Ralsei was wearing when we first met him. I'd argue that this particular image seems to represent not just Ralsei, but Ralsei as the prince, in particular the Prince of the Dark, as the hood and robe's length work together to obfuscate Ralsei, to show literally none of his identity or selfhood at all. He has been subsumed into the role he is meant to play. Ralsei the prince, not Ralsei the person. And prince itself is of course a very specifically gendered term. It's not an individual, it's a title, a role that can traditionally only be filled by men. We can directly contrast this with the Ralsei that we know for the majority of the game. Ralsei is clearly afraid at first to reveal his true self, speaking and acting much more like a typical mysterious RPG tutorial character in our first interaction with him, that is, until Suzy prompts him to take the robe off. This first less obscured version of Ralsei is the one we see for most of Chapter 1. This outfit definitely gives her a lot more freedom and lets her be pretty emotive with facial expressions, but the hat obscures her face, keeping her true appearance a bit of a secret. I'd argue that this parallels her measured but optimistic approach to immersing herself with these new friendships. She's letting her guard down a bit, but still not completely opening up to us to the level we'd see in later chapters. When things do end up going a bit better than she likely ever could have hoped, she takes off the hat, casting darkness over her face, and reveals her true identity. This scene always felt very much like a coming out scene to me. Not in a literal or direct sense, as Ralsei hasn't done much self-exploration at this point in the story, but I do think it symbolizes that she's going to try her best to be fully and unabashedly herself around these two, something she's never really done before. We hear Ralsei say as much herself in the acid tunnel scene that we talked about earlier. With all this added context, these depictions of Ralsei dressed as this fully obscured prince take on an even more ominous tone. It makes it much more literal, the idea that for Ralsei to truly fall in line with what the prophecy says is to come to her, she must give up all of the personhood she's found in order to return to being the Prince of Darkness demanded by the prophecy. The prince, the lonely prince, fated to be alone before and likely after the legend is played out. The only way he can truly matter is by following the path laid out for him, to shroud himself in darkness, in a sense, to stay closeted. On the other hand, if this shadowy cloaked prince is the version of Ralsei that she has to be for the sake of the prophecy, with almost no personality or agency, then Ralsei's unmasked and unshadowed face symbolizes her true self. It's Ralsei as Ralsei, the person she wants to be, even if by her own admittance she has no idea who that person is yet. This kind of obscure cutscene you can get while Suzy's talking to Tenna confirms even further that Ralsei is happiest when she gets to be seen as her true appearance. Would you like to talk about something? Huh? My face? Huh? I'm not quite sure what you... Well, Chris, I'm sorry, but this is my face. And if there's one thing I like about myself, it's this. With all of this in mind, we can kind of construct a Ralsei spectrum, so to speak, with the most obscured version of Ralsei, or the Prince of Darkness, on the left, and the most open and happy version of Ralsei on the right. If the prophecy is to be believed, then at some point Ralsei might even end up more repressed and resigned to having nothing in the face of fate. On the other hand, if Susie does succeed in her mission to stop what's prophesied to happen, then we can imagine Ralsei ending up in a place much more free than anything we've seen in the game at all. In fact, there's quite a few things in the game that might indicate that Ralsei was never meant to take the hat off at all. The battle and menu sprites, the Ralsei character in Tenna's video games, even the save file screen. So much of the narrative of the game seems to have been anticipating a less confident Ralsei, a Ralsei more willing to stay in the box and who hadn't revealed as much about herself as she has. But it's too late now. The coat rack Darkner says they seem to have lost the hat forever. There's no going back for her at this point. Throughout the Church Dark World, Ralsei is clearly doing everything she can to prevent the other two, especially Susie, to have to face the prophecy in the way she has. But by the end, Susie says it doesn't matter what it says because none of them will let that happen. We get the idea for the first time that the heroes are going to resist it anyway and at least try to forge their own paths. I think all of this ties in very well with the Transfem reading of Ralsei. She had to be this prince that she was fated to be because it meant her having a future, being important, making friends. But now that she's here, those very same friends care so much more about her than they do the prophecy or whatever it says Ralsei is supposed to be, or how things are supposed to end for any of them. And if they work together, then maybe, just maybe, they can overcome their fate, write a new ending, and choose their own future. At this point, I've hopefully made a strong enough argument with everything that I've described that Ralsei repressing a core part of herself is a really compelling reading, and both her lack of really defined identity and struggle to fit this prince archetype placed on her invite a strong trans headcanon, even without actually touching on Ralsei's femininity. Honestly, I feel like I deserve some extra points for getting this far into the video essay without bringing any of that up. Alright, points for me, bring it on. Anyway, with all that established, I think it's finally time to talk about the actual gendered aspects of Ralsei's characterization. Ralsei is clearly a pretty feminine character, at least compared to your traditional male deuteragonist video game hero. I don't think that's a particularly controversial statement, especially considering how many new or younger Deltarune fans seem to be confused about it. Even if Ralsei's femininity was the only thing supporting this headcanon, I do think it would still be fine to want to read Ralsei in this way, but even with that said, there's still quite a few aspects of Ralsei's relationship with femininity that stand out to me in a particularly non-cisgender way. As we've already discussed, there's the general progression of Ralsei's appearance throughout the chapters, representing the contrast between Ralsei the Prince and Ralsei as Ralsei. But I feel like it's worth mentioning that while the cloaked prince appearance is completely degendered in the sense of betraying no identity at all, Ralsei's more open and truly herself appearances are progressively more feminine. But despite the parallels with the progression of her character, these are just general appearance details and therefore aren't that interpretable. What is a lot more interpretable are the moments where Ralsei expresses an active interest in being more feminine than she is at the start of the story, and especially those where she indicates a bit of reluctance and uncertainty about that desire of hers. The first time we really see this tendency of Ralsei's is in this scene in Chapter 1. You can find a chest which contains a white ribbon, intended to be the first real obtainable piece of armor. Filling the tutorial role that Ralsei tends to play in this chapter, she comments on it, and suggests, of course, that Chris should put it on themselves. But when you put it on Ralsei instead, this happens. That ribbon is armor, Chris. It increases defense. Why don't you try wearing it in the equipment menu? I think it'd look great on you. Chris, you're giving it to me? Well, does it look pretty? This scene. This is the actual scene that inspired the origin of trans girl Ralsei back in the day. There's so much to talk about in this context. The genuine and obvious surprise at getting this item, the way that she takes not one, not two, but 3 whole text boxes of time to process her surprise at receiving the ribbon, and her blushing. She's so happy. The choice of the word pretty here always strikes me too. Like, not just cute. Cute would work completely fine here, but calling Ralsei cute is not that out of the ordinary for the game, and it's also not as gendered of a term. Being cute is certainly not the most traditionally masculine thing in the world, but there's a lot more leniency to it than pretty. Pretty has really heavy feminine implications in almost all contexts, and Ralsei gets so excited at this idea of getting to be pretty. Do I look pretty, Susie? Leave me out of this. You didn't answer the question. How am I supposed to know? Leave me alone. It's just wonderful, and if you re-equip it or give it to her later on, she reacts in a very similar way, with the same kind of unconfident excitement. Chapter 2 also introduces the pink ribbon, an item with very similar interactions when given to Ralsei. This item was actually in the code of Chapter 1, but when either of these are equipped in Chapter 2 specifically, the dialogue is different. The wording here is very key in my opinion. It's nice dressing up and being dressed up. I think this lines up very well with how at this point in the story, Ralsei is a lot more comfortable being herself and therefore being openly feminine around her friends who clearly accept her for who she is. Not being a girl, of course, there's still that darn prophecy to worry about, but being kinda feminine seems fine. But that's the crucial thing. These ribbons can only be given to Ralsei. We are dressing her up. Even if she can be feminine, it has to be given to her by us, the player, or Chris, the leader. And it isn't something she's yet comfortable choosing for herself. Remember that dialogue from the desert board in Chapter 3? Oh, and speaking of that chapter, the minigame also introduces a new ribbon item, the blue ribbon. There's also a blue ribbon in the main story itself, obtainable from the gacha machine, which Ralsei does an adorable cheerleader routine with. White, pink, and blue ribbons? Now, where have I seen those colors before? But despite that obvious correlation, it's actually the minigame version of the blue ribbon that I find more interesting from a thematic perspective. There are actually 2 in the board, and we can easily get one on Chris. And because of the controller swapping, we can even get one on Susie, despite her going out of the way to tell us over and over that she hates the ribbons. But Ralsei? As far as I can tell, there's no way at all to get Ralsei to wear the ribbon on this board. You see, unlike the armor in the overworld, the items in this minigame can only be equipped by the person themselves. You can literally pick Ralsei up as Susie and throw her over the ribbon, but she won't run into it or put it on. We can dress her up all we like, and she clearly finds it nice, but making the choice herself is just not something she's ready for at this point. Now, okay, maybe all that sounds a little bit like reaching. You can't get the ribbon on Ralsei because you can't play as her in this segment, obviously. There's nothing more to it. And sure, I'll grant that it's possible that the white, pink, and blue ribbons that Ralsei gets excited and emotional about wearing might not mean anything at all. I mean, Chris can wear them too, right? And it's not like there's some seed in the game that assigns narrative significance to the fact that Ralsei is the one wearing the ribbons. Is Susie, There's a few things I still can't say, but from now on, I want to tell you everything I can. So, know any codes to any doors? No, I do not. Then, anything about Noelle? I know which items of ours she can equip. Then again, you're supposed to equip ribbons. Okay, you actually know Jack. Great. Oh, so, yeah, according to the prophecy, apparently Susie, the girl, was the one meant to be wearing the ribbons all along. And Ralsei, oh, sorry, that is to say, the prince, was never meant to wear them at all. Alright, so the prince isn't supposed to wear the ribbons. Fair enough. It's not like there's some other item obtainable very soon after this conversation that would somehow relate to... Princess ribbon? I mean, yes, obviously this is probably referencing the Mizzles, but my goodness. The white, pink, blue, and princess ribbons, all items not intended for the Prince of the Dark, but that can clearly be given to him despite what the prophecy intends. The game itself even expects you to give the ribbons to Ralsei. The default save file when you start Chapter 2 has the white ribbon already equipped. But there is more. One more item that Ralsei has a reaction to in the same way as the ribbons. One that I think tips the scales more clearly than anything else on this list, from compelling analytical reading of a character to full-blown conspiratorial theory. And that is the dress. The dress is a fairly forgettable item that can be found in Chapter 2. This Addison offers it for a pretty decent price, and after buying it, you learn the actual item you bought was the mannequin itself. The dress is sewn onto it and unremovable. No one can actually wear it, but Chris can somehow equip it anyway. It gives you a special type-based defense against Spam to Neo. For most Deltarune fans, this is probably about as much as they really care to think about this item. A strange mannequin somewhat resembling Spamton that might imply something about his backstory? But there is so much more to talk about with this item. Not the mannequin, but the dress itself. Because, my friends, you see, we have seen this dress before! It is in fact almost identical to the dress worn by Mettaton in his iconic musical scene in Undertale. This scene is notably an early instance of Toby depicting gender nonconformity and queerness. Having a male character wear a dress at all is obviously minorly controversial, although it is tempered a bit by the fact that Mettaton in this stage in the game is still a boxy computer-like robot. Mettaton himself, though, is a character who's heavily coded to be a trans man. In Undertale, ghosts as a species seem to be non-binary by default, and Mettaton's diaries reveal that, on top of being Napstablook's cousin, before his glamorous stage persona, he was a much more timid and repressed character, who longed to have a form that let him feel like himself. I don't think it's a stretch to say that the way this mini narrative is written is pretty similar tonally to the way a lot of the Ralsei stuff we've looked at feels. I mean, just look at these parallels. Toby using the phrase be yourself as code for be trans without actually having to say be trans is literally like an established thing. But that isn't even as far as the trans associations with this dress go. You see, after the show, you can interact with this character, a male lion monster as indicated by his mane. He reacts with admiration and longing, saying he wishes he could wear a dress like that too. How interesting. If you return to the spot at the end of the pacifist route, the same lion can be found, now wearing the very same dress. This is a character who was introduced as a boy, who expressed an unconfident interest in the idea of presenting more feminine, and then ended up actually transitioning by the end of the story. And just in case you weren't sure if this was meant to be a trans thing and not just more gender nonconformity, her appearance in Deltarune confirms it much more explicitly. Her hometown equivalent seems to be fully transitioned and working in the diner as a waitress. How wonderful. So yeah, I think it's fair to say this particular dress is pretty clearly associated with trans femininity, and specifically with characters wanting to wear it who will later end up discovering their desire to be trans femme. Oh, and what is Ralsei's reaction when you try to give it to her in Deltarune? I rest my case. With all this explained, hopefully now you can see why Trans Ralsei is a reading that means a lot to me and to a lot of other trans people out there. Time will only tell what direction Ralsei's story goes in Chapter 5, but we seem to be closer than ever to the time it releases, especially at the time of me recording this, which is already late December. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching, and thanks for tuning into this channel. I know it's been a while since I really was able to do a lot on it, but hopefully now that this is out, I can really get back to making regular videos again. As fun as it is to commit to a really huge video with a lot of research and effort and high quality editing, they take a really long time to make, and I'd like to make some more low-key stuff for a little bit. Just something fun to, get videos out regularly for once. But if you enjoy my style, the little cats and my writing and humor, then that's not going away. The core spirit of Chattercat will always stick around, so. That said, I really do want to finish that FNAF series, especially get that third video out, because again, the script has been written and recorded for like 2 years now. I mean, I finished it in like 2023. I do want to make sure that people still, have demand for that. But yeah, if you're still interested in that video, just let me know in the comments, or maybe even go back to that first video and comment there. If people do still have an interest in it, I mean, I certainly do, and I'd really like to get it out, at some point, for sure. I think now that this is out though, I feel really confident that I can make that video, and hopefully eventually the other videos in that FNAF series. I have a lot of other stuff to say about Deltarune, so there will be more Deltarune videos on this channel eventually, I promise that. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.